The heat hits Jake Mercer like a physical wall the moment he steps off the tour van, a furnace blast of New Mexico sun that bakes the desert floor into a cracked mosaic of red and ochre. He adjusts his aviator sunglasses, the ones with the scratched left lens he keeps meaning to replace, and sweeps his arm toward a patch of unremarkable dirt, ringed by faded yellow rope. "Right here, folks," he announces, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of a carnival barker. July 1947. This is where eyewitnesses reported seeing debris scattered across 3 football fields, metallic fragments, symbols no one could read, and according to Major Jesse Marcel himself, material that couldn't be cut, burned, or bent. The tourists, a retired couple from Ohio, 3 college kids with matching alien t-shirts, a woman clutching a crystalline pendant, raise their phones in unison, snapping photos of absolutely nothing. Jake watches them with detached amusement. They want the myth. They need the mystery, and he's more than happy to sell it to them. He's been doing this for 7 years now, ever since his journalism career imploded in a spectacular mess of burned sources and broken promises. The transition from investigative reporter to UFO tour guide had seemed like professional suicide at the time, but Jake discovered something valuable in the wreckage: comfort. Out here in Roswell, nobody expected the truth. They wanted stories, spectacle, a brush with the impossible that they could Instagram and forget by dinner. Now, the official story, Jake continues, leading the group toward a weathered information placard he helped install 3 summers ago, is that this was a weather balloon. Project Mogul, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests, but the rancher who found it, Mac Brazel, said he'd seen plenty of weather balloons. This was different. The college kids exchange knowing looks. The woman with the pendant nods vigorously, as if Jake has just confirmed her deepest convictions. He feels the familiar twinge of self-loathing that accompanies these moments, the recognition that he's become exactly what he used to mock, an expert in mythology, a PhD in bullshit. But the tips are good, and the work is easy, and nobody's trying to kill him for asking the wrong questions. His trailer office squats at the edge of the tour company lot like a rusted metal tumor, surrounded by creosote bushes and decorated with a hand-painted sign reading Mercer's Roswell Truth Tours. The interior is a museum of his own cynicism, walls plastered with framed tabloid covers, "I was Bigfoot's love slave," shelves sagging under the weight of dog-eared conspiracy books, a filing cabinet stuffed with Freedom of Information Act requests he submitted years ago and never followed up on. The crown jewel of his collection hangs above his desk, a reproduction of the alleged alien autopsy photo, the one debunked so thoroughly that even the true believers abandoned it. Jake keeps it there as a reminder, a personal monument to the death of his idealism. He knows the law better than anyone in Roswell, maybe better than anyone in the country. He can recite the timeline of the Roswell crash by heart, down to the hour. He can name every member of the alleged MJ-12 committee. He knows the Project Blue Book case files, the testimonies collected by the Condon Committee, the contradictions in every official report. He's read the books, interviewed the witnesses, traced the paper trails that led nowhere, and he doesn't believe a word of it. That's the secret Jake carries, the thing that makes him so good at his job. His encyclopedic knowledge wasn't born from belief, but from professional training, the same obsessive research skills that once made him a decent journalist. He accumulated the facts with the clinical detachment of a coroner cataloguing injuries. The difference is that coroners deal with bodies. Jake deals with myths that refuse to die. When the elderly man approaches him in the parking lot after the afternoon tour, Jake's first instinct is annoyance. The sun is setting, painting the desert in shades of burnt copper, and he's looking forward to a cold beer and the numbing glow of cable news. But something in the man's bearing makes Jake pause, a military straightness to his spine despite the tremor in his hands, a fever brightness in his eyes that speaks of urgency rather than delusion. "Mr. Mercer," the man says, his voice rough as sandpaper. The civilian clothes hang loose on his gaunt frame, but Jake recognizes the posture of a uniform underneath. "I need to tell you something. I don't have much time." Jake has heard this before. The deathbed confession is a Roswell tradition, as ritualized as the alien festivals and UFO museums. Old men with guilty consciences or failing minds, convinced that their final act should be revealing the truth about little green men. He's learned to nod sympathetically, accept whatever pamphlet or blurry photo they offer, and send them on their way with their dignity intact. But this man grips Jake's arm with surprising strength, fingers digging into muscle, and leans close enough that Jake can smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "3I Atlas is the fisherman," the colonel whispers, each word deliberate and urgent. "Nibiru is coming home. They're not studying it. They're weaponizing it. The coordinates—" He presses something into Jake's palm, a business card with handwritten numbers on the back. "You'll understand when you get there. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry for all of it." The man's eyes are wet, rimmed with red, and Jake sees something he wasn't expecting: genuine anguish. Not the performative guilt of a hoaxer or the confused distress of dementia, but the raw, corrosive pain of a man carrying real secrets. Before Jake can respond, the colonel releases his arm and walks away, his gait unsteady, disappearing between the parked cars with the determination of someone who's just set down a terrible burden. Jake looks at the card in his hand. The front identifies Colonel Richard Voss, USF, Retidors, with a Phoenix address. The back is covered in precise handwriting, latitude and longitude coordinates, followed by a string of numbers that might be dates or codes or nothing at all. He tells himself it's theater, an elaborate prank, the ramblings of a dying man desperate for significance. He slips the card into his pocket and heads home, trying to ignore the unease curling in his gut like smoke. The sound of engines wakes him at 2 a.m. Jake's trailer sits on a half-acre of scrubland he rents from a cousin who moved to Albuquerque and forgot to sell the property. No neighbors within shouting distance, which is usually a blessing. Tonight, it feels like exposure. The rumble of multiple vehicles grows louder, and then headlights flood through his windows, turning the interior into a harsh landscape of shadows and white glare. He rolls out of bed, instinct taking over before his conscious mind can catch up. The crawl space, the narrow gap beneath the trailer where the plumbing runs, accessed through a panel in the bathroom floor. He's used it once before to hide from an ex-girlfriend's husband, and the memory would be funny if his hands weren't shaking. Jake drops through the opening just as he hears the front door splinter inward. They're professionals. He can tell by the silence, no shouting, no chaos, just the methodical sound of a systematic search. Boots on cheap linoleum, the crash of furniture overturned, cushions slashed, drawers emptied onto the floor. Jake lies on his back in the dirt, heart hammering against his ribs, staring up at the trailer's underbelly as footsteps pass overhead. He hears the distinctive crack of his laptop being destroyed, the tinkle of glass as they smash his hard drives. They're not here to arrest him. They're here to erase something, to recover whatever the colonel gave him, or to ensure Jake can't use it. The realization crystallizes with terrible clarity. The coordinates matter. The cryptic phrase matters, and people with resources, people with the ability to mobilize a team in the middle of the night to tear apart a nobody's trailer, will kill to keep them secret. Jake's comfortable life, his safe existence of tourist tips and curated myths, has just shattered like the glass above his head. They leave as efficiently as they came, engines fading into the desert night. Jake waits an extra 30 minutes, counting his heartbeats, before he crawls out of the crawl space. The trailer looks like a natural disaster hit it. Furniture overturned, walls damaged, every drawer and cabinet gutted. His research files are scattered across the floor like confetti. His television is smashed. Even his reproduction alien autopsy photo has been torn from the wall and sliced apart. Dawn is breaking when Jake surveys the wreckage, painting the destruction in shades of grey and pink. He finds the Colonel's business card in his jeans pocket. He'd been wearing them when he went to bed. It's the only thing they didn't find. Every instinct screams at him to run, to walk away from this, get in his van and drive until Roswell is a dust cloud in his rearview mirror. Return to the script, pretend this never happened, rebuild his comfortable lie somewhere else. He could do it. He's good at running, good at choosing the safe option, the path that doesn't lead to consequences. But standing in the ruins of his trailer, holding a dead man's coordinates, because Jake is certain now that the Colonel is dead, that his confession was the last act of a conscience finally breaking. He feels something he hasn't felt in years. Curiosity, not the performance he puts on for tourists, but the real thing. The hunger that drove him into journalism in the first place, before fear and failure taught him to choose comfort over truth. Jake pockets the card and reaches for his keys. The comfortable life is over. Whatever comes next, at least it will be real. The coordinates lead Jake deeper into the New Mexico desert than he's ever ventured, past the tourist routes and alien-themed diners, into the kind of empty that makes you question whether civilization was ever real. The highway narrows to a two-lane road, then crumbles into gravel, then becomes little more than tire tracks through creosote and sagebrush. His van kicks up dust that hangs in the air like a funeral veil, and the GPS signal flickers and dies somewhere around mile marker 40. He's navigating by the handwritten numbers now, cross-referencing them with a paper map he bought at a gas station that looked like it hadn't seen customers since the Cold War. The irony isn't lost on him. After years of selling fantasies about government secrets hidden in the desert, he's actually hunting one. The difference is that this time, the fear is real. His hands are tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white, and every time he sees movement in his rearview mirror, his heart kicks like a mule. The listening post materializes out of the heat shimmer like a mirage that forgot to disappear. Chain-link fence, 10 feet high and sagging with rust, encircles a compound of low concrete buildings with narrow windows that stare at nothing. Faded signs warn of federal property and authorized personnel only, but the words are bleached ghosts, barely legible beneath decades of sun damage. The place has the abandoned quality of Cold War infrastructure, built to watch the skies for Soviet missiles, then forgotten when the threat evaporated and the budget moved elsewhere. Jake parks outside the fence, engine ticking in the heat, and considers turning back. This is still a choice. He could drive home, or what's left of it, accept that his comfortable life is over, and start rebuilding somewhere else. Phoenix, maybe, or Austin. Somewhere with decent Wi-Fi and a local tour company that needs a guy who knows how to spin a story. But the memory of boots overhead, the sound of his life being systematically destroyed, keeps him moving. He pulls wire cutters from his glove box, purchased this morning along with a flashlight, batteries, and a first aid kit he hopes he won't need, and approaches the fence, the metal parts with surprising ease, years of oxidation making it brittle as old bone. Inside the compound, the silence is absolute. No birds, no insects. Just the whisper of wind through the buildings and the crunch of his footsteps on gravel and broken glass. Jake makes his way to the largest structure, a 3-story block with a steel door hanging half off its hinges. The interior is a cave of shadows and dust, lit by shafts of sunlight piercing through gaps in the roof. Water damage has turned the walls into abstract art, mold blooming in black constellations. He finds the stairs to the basement behind a collapsed partition, concrete steps descending into deeper darkness. The flashlight beam cuts through the gloom, illuminating a corridor lined with stripped equipment racks and tangles of cable. This is where they would have housed the listening equipment, massive computers that filled rooms and generated enough heat to require industrial cooling systems, all supposedly decommissioned decades ago, except the hum reaches him before he sees the source, a low, steady vibration that he feels in his chest more than hears. Jake follows it to a reinforced door at the end of the corridor, this one intact and secured with a keypad lock that glows with a faint red LED, still powered, still active. His journalist instincts, atrophied but not dead, wake up fully. Whatever is behind that door is important enough to maintain in a supposedly abandoned facility. Important enough to guard with encryption and power infrastructure. Important enough, maybe, to kill for. The keypad is old military spec, 8 digits. Jake tries the obvious combinations first. Zeros, ones, the year of the Roswell crash. Nothing. He's reaching for the wire cutters, considering whether he can pry the panel off and hotwire it, when he notices the faint smudge marks on 4 keys. 2, 4, 7, and 9. The Colonel's fingerprints, maybe, left from years of access. Jake tries different combinations of the 4 numbers, working through permutations, sweat dripping down his back in the basement heat. On the 14th attempt, 74729247, the lock clicks open with a sound like a held breath releasing. The server farm beyond the door is a cathedral of blinking lights. Rows of rack-mounted equipment stretch into the darkness, status LEDs creating constellations of green and amber. The cooling system kicks on as Jake enters, fans whirring to life, and the temperature drops 10 degrees. This isn't abandoned infrastructure. This is active, maintained, streaming data in real time from somewhere. Jake's laptop feels like a toy as he sets it on a dusty workstation and begins searching for an access port. He finds it on the nearest rack, a standard Ethernet connection that makes this almost too easy. His first thought is trap, but if they wanted to catch him, they already know he's here. The fence cutting wasn't subtle. This is something else. This is someone, the Colonel maybe, or an ally Jake doesn't know about, leaving a door open. The connection establishes immediately, and Jake's screen floods with directory listings. Terabytes of data organized in folders with names like Atlas, Trajectory, Nibiru, Intercept, Spectral Analysis, and Contact Protocols. His hands are shaking as he begins downloading everything he can fit on his portable drives, watching the progress bars crawl while his mind races. 3i Atlas was identified 2 years ago. Jake remembers the headlines. An interstellar object passing through the solar system at speeds no natural comet should achieve. Astronomers called it a breakthrough, a visitor from another star system. The trajectory data on his screen tells a different story. The orbital mechanics are wrong. Corrections in the flight path, micro-adjustments that require thrust vectoring, small but unmistakable deviations from a ballistic trajectory. Jake's not an astronomer, but he's spent enough time learning the myths to recognize the reality when it's staring at him from a classified dataset. 3i Atlas isn't a comet, it's a ship, and it's under intelligent control. The second revelation hits harder. Nibiru isn't a mythical planet, but a classification, a target. The files contain spectral analysis of an object in the outer solar system, beyond the orbit of Neptune, with a composition that doesn't match anything in the known catalogue of trans-Neptunian objects. Energy signatures, electromagnetic pulses, and trajectory calculations showing 3i Atlas making micro-corrections to intercept it. The fisherman is coming home. Jake is so absorbed in the data that he almost misses the implication of what he's doing. By downloading these files, he's crossed a threshold. He's not just a witness anymore. He's an accomplice, a threat. The people who destroyed his trailer will know he accessed this server, and they'll come for him with everything they have. His finger hovers over the cancel button for a long moment. The downloads are only 40% complete. He could stop now, wipe the cache, walk away with plausible deniability. Instead, he plugs in a second drive and starts a parallel download. Cassandra Wu's apartment in Albuquerque is exactly what Jake expected, and somehow worse. The studio occupies the third floor of a building that should have been condemned, accessible via an exterior staircase that sways with each step. He knocks on a door covered with faded bumper stickers. "I want to believe. Question everything. The truth is out there," and waits. The woman who answers looks like she hasn't slept in days. Hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Glasses held together with electrical tape, wearing a t-shirt advertising a UFO conference from 2019. But her eyes are sharp, alert, and she's holding a tire iron in her left hand with the casual grip of someone who knows how to use it. "Cassandra Wu?" Jake asks. "Who's asking?" Her voice carries the rasp of too much coffee and too many cigarettes. "Jake Mercer. I have data that... I know who you are." She looks him up and down with obvious disdain. "The tour guide. The guy who makes money selling alien t-shirts to rubes. What the hell do you want?" Jake holds up one of the portable drives. "I have classified telemetry data on 3i Atlas and a target designated Nibiru. I need help decoding it, and you're the only person I know who's spent years researching this without selling out or giving up." Cassandra stares at the drive like it might be a bomb. "Where did you get that?" "A dead Air Force colonel and a decommissioned listening post that's still very much commissioned. Can I come in, or should we have this conversation where anyone with a directional microphone can hear us?" She hesitates, then steps back, lowering the tire iron. "You've got 5 minutes. Make them count." The interior of the apartment is a conspiracy theorist's fever dream made manifest. The walls are papered with printouts, astronomical charts, declassified documents with portions blacked out, newspaper clippings dating back to the 1960s, satellite photos marked with handwritten annotations. Red string connects disparate pieces of information in a web that would look insane if you didn't know the context. But Jake does know now. He's carrying the context on 3 portable drives. Cassandra's workstation is 2 monitors on a desk made from a door and cinder blocks, surrounded by towers of reference books and empty energy drink cans. She's been living this obsession for years. Jake realizes, while he was selling comfortable lies, she was digging for uncomfortable truths and paying the price for it. 15 years, Cassandra says, noticing his gaze. 15 years since I first found the discrepancy in the Kuiper Belt surveys. An object that shouldn't exist, in an orbit that makes no sense, emitting energy signatures that don't match any natural phenomenon. I tried to publish, got laughed out of 3 journals, lost my position at the observatory. My editor at the Times killed my story and suggested I take a sabbatical. She gestures at the wall of research. This is my sabbatical. Jake connects the drive to her system. I spent 7 years selling alien myths to tourists because it was safe and easy and didn't require me to care about anything real. I'm trying to care now. Help me understand what I'm looking at. The mistrust doesn't leave her eyes, but something shifts. Recognition, maybe, of a fellow traveler on the road from cynicism to something like conviction. Cassandra pulls up a second chair and begins opening files. They work through the afternoon and into the evening, cross-referencing the classified telemetry with Cassandra's 15 years of accumulated research. The data begins to tell a story that rewrites everything. 3i Atlas entered the solar system 18 months ago, decelerating in a way that should be impossible for a natural object. The spectral analysis shows a composition that includes metallic alloys not found in nature, and the trajectory corrections are unmistakable. This is an object under active control, making deliberate course changes to intercept Nibiru. It's a rescue mission, Cassandra whispers, her fingers hovering over a visualization showing the two objects' projected intersection point. Atlas is coming to retrieve Nibiru. They're not studying us. They're not invading. They're just coming home. Jake leans back, running his hands through his hair. And we're doing what? The files reference weaponization protocols, contact prevention. We're doing what humans do best, Cassandra says bitterly, turning a miracle into a threat. The surveillance starts that night. Jake notices the unmarked car first, a grey sedan that's too clean for the neighborhood, parked across the street with two occupants who never quite look directly at Cassandra's window. He points it out, and she closes the blinds without comment, as if this is routine. They've been watching me for years, she says. I got used to it. Unmarked cars, strange clicks on my phone line. Near misses with vehicles that run red lights. You learn to live with it or you give up and let them win. Jake's laptop chimes with a notification that makes his blood run cold. A warning message, origin unknown, appears on his screen. Return the data. Last warning. He shows it to Cassandra, whose expression hardens. They're trying to scare you into compliance. Classic intimidation. The question is whether they're willing to escalate beyond threats. The answer comes 2 days later. Jake's van won't start, and when he pops the hood, he finds the brake lines neatly severed. Not worn, not corroded. Cut with precision. A message written in mechanical sabotage. Cassandra's gas line develops a leak the same afternoon, filling her apartment with fumes that would have killed her if a neighbor hadn't smelled it and called the fire department. They move their operation to a motel on the edge of town, paying cash using false names. The decryption continues. They uncover communication protocols, mathematical sequences that might be attempts at first contact, and a file buried deep in the directory structure labeled Project Atlas Termination. Jake opens it with hands that won't stop shaking. Inside are operational plans to intercept and destroy 3I Atlas using weaponized orbital platforms, supposedly defensive satellites that were sold to Congress as asteroid deflection systems. The target date is 3 weeks away. They're going to kill them, Jake says, the words tasting like ash. 2 civilizations trying to reunite, and we're going to murder them because we can't distinguish between contact and invasion. Cassandra saves the file to multiple drives, her jaw set. Then we need to make sure everyone knows before they can pull the trigger. We need to go public, and we need to do it in a way they can't suppress or discredit. Jake thinks of his destroyed trailer, his severed brake lines, the colonel's whispered apology. He thinks of 15 years of Cassandra's life spent screaming into a void that refused to listen. And he thinks of the comfortable lies he used to sell, the safe cynicism that let him sleep at night. I know someone, he says slowly. A producer at 60 Minutes. We burned that bridge years ago, but if the story is big enough, if the evidence is solid enough, she might listen. The unmarked car returns that night, parking directly outside their motel room window. Jake watches the headlights cut through the cheap curtains and feels the weight of what they're attempting. They're 2 people, a disgraced journalist and a blacklisted researcher, trying to stop a military operation backed by classified budgets and institutional momentum. The odds are absurd, but the alternative is complicity. The alternative is watching 2 civilizations die, because no one was willing to risk speaking truth to power. Jake opens his laptop and begins drafting an email, while Cassandra organizes the evidence into an airtight presentation. Outside, the surveillance continues. Inside, they work through the night, committed now, exposed and vulnerable, and absolutely certain that this is the only choice that matters. The comfortable life is over. Whatever comes next, they'll face it together. The breakthrough comes at 3 in the morning, when exhaustion has scraped away every filter and pretense, leaving only raw concentration. Cassandra sits hunched over her monitor, eyes bloodshot, fingers flying across the keyboard as she runs the decryption algorithm for the 18th time. Jake paces behind her, too wired on coffee and adrenaline to sit still, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen with agonizing slowness. When the file finally opens, Cassandra goes completely still. Her hand moves to her mouth, and Jake hears her breath catch like she's been punched. "Oh my God," she whispers. "Jake, look at this." He moves to stand behind her chair, and the visualization on the screen rewrites everything he thought he understood. It's a 3D simulation rendered in clinical white and blue, two objects in the vast emptiness of space, connected by something that looks like a bridge made of warped starlight. The rendering shows gravitational distortion as a visible beam, a tether of bent space-time linking 3i Atlas to Nibiru with mathematical precision. Cassandra zooms in, and the details emerge like a photograph developing in reverse. 3i Atlas isn't just approaching Nibiru, it's pulling it. The larger object is using some kind of directed gravitational manipulation to gently, inexorably draw the smaller vessel toward it. The calculations scroll past on a secondary window, trajectory corrections measured in micrometers, force vectors calibrated to compensate for solar wind and planetary gravity wells, a rescue operation choreographed with precision that makes human spaceflight look like children throwing rocks. "It's a tractor beam," Jake says, and the words sound absurd even as he speaks them. Science fiction made real. They're reeling it in. Cassandra nods, her eyes never leaving the screen. She opens another file, and this one contains historical data, trajectory analysis going back 78 years. The pattern is unmistakable. 3i Atlas entered interstellar space in 1947, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, and has been traveling through the void between stars for nearly 8 decades. The precision of the timeline hits Jake like ice water. "Roswell," he says. "The crash at Roswell wasn't an accident. It was a disaster, part of a larger mission." Cassandra pulls up another visualization, this one showing Nibiru's orbit in the outer solar system. The object has been there for decades, hidden beyond Neptune, maintaining a holding pattern while broadcasting a signal too faint for human instruments to detect but unmistakable in the classified telemetry data. A distress call, a beacon saying, "We're here, we're waiting, please come get us." "It's a generation ship," Cassandra says, her voice thick with emotion. "The survivors of the Roswell crash, or their descendants, have been trapped out there for 78 years, living on whatever resources they had, waiting for rescue. And 3i Atlas is finally here to bring them home." Jake sinks into the chair beside her, his mind struggling to process the implications. This isn't an invasion. This isn't a threat. This is a tragedy finally reaching resolution. A civilization's lost children being recovered after nearly a century adrift in hostile space. The myths he sold to tourists for 7 years, the comfortable fantasies about government cover-ups and alien visitors, were shadows of a truth far more profound and heartbreaking. "They survived," he says quietly. "Whoever was on that ship in 1947, they survived the crash, and they've been waiting all this time." The awe is overwhelming. Jake has spent years cynically monetizing the Roswell story, treating it as theater, and now he's staring at evidence that the core of the myth is real. Not in the way the true believers imagined, no autopsies, no Area 51 dissections, but in a way that's somehow more miraculous. A rescue operation spanning decades and light years, executed with patience and precision, that speaks to a civilization far more advanced and compassionate than humanity's. Cassandra wipes her eyes, and Jake realizes she's crying, not from sadness, but from vindication. 15 years of her life spent chasing this truth, dismissed as a crank and a conspiracy theorist, and she was right. She was right all along. "We need to see what the military plans to do with this," Jake says, forcing himself back to the immediate problem. If they know what 3i Atlas is doing, they know. Cassandra's voice hardens as she opens another encrypted file. Trust me, they've known for years. The question is what they plan to do about it. The document that appears on screen carries classification markings Jake has only seen in movies, majestic beyond top secret, with clearance codes and security caveats that make it clear this is among the most protected information in the US government. The header reads, Asset Acquisition Protocol, Nibiru Atlas Convergence Event. Jake begins reading, and the clinical language turns his stomach. The memo is structured like a business proposal, complete with cost-benefit analysis and risk assessments. It outlines in bureaucratic prose what the military has been planning for months: the interception and capture of Nibiru for strategic intelligence value and technological acquisition. The Pentagon knows exactly what 3i Atlas is doing. They've had the same trajectory data, the same analysis, the same understanding that this is a rescue operation, and they've decided to turn it into an act of piracy. They want the ship, Cassandra reads aloud, her voice shaking with anger. An intact alien vessel with living descendants who've been isolated from their home civilization for 8 decades. The intelligence value alone, cultural information, technological specifications, biological data, and they're willing to kill everyone on the rescue vessel to get it. Jake scrolls through the document, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles ache. The military has spent 70 years reverse engineering fragments from the Roswell crash. Stealth technology, fiber optics, integrated circuits, all supposedly derived from studying the wreckage. But fragments aren't enough. They want the real prize, a functional ship with living crew who can be interrogated, studied, dissected if necessary. The plan is horrifyingly simple. 3i Atlas is using a directed gravitational beam to retrieve Nibiru, which means disrupting that beam will sever the connection. The military has orbital platforms, officially designated as asteroid deflection systems, funded through NASA budgets and international treaties, that can generate electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to interfere with the tractor field. Once the connection is broken, 3i Atlas will have to choose, attempt a risky physical recovery that brings it within range of Earth's weapons, or abandon Nibiru and flee. Either way, the generation ship becomes a target of opportunity, isolated, vulnerable, ripe for capture. This is monstrous, Jake says, and the word feels inadequate. This is murder and kidnapping on a civilizational scale, dressed up in military jargon and justified by national security concerns. We have to stop this. We have to get this information out. Cassandra is already moving, pulling a stack of encrypted drives from a drawer and connecting them to her system. Her hands are steady now, focused by purpose. This is what she's been preparing for all those years, the moment when the evidence becomes undeniable and the truth demands action. I'm making copies, she says, multiple redundancies, air-gapped backups. We package this with context, timeline, technical analysis, historical documentation, the Pentagon memo, everything a journalist would need to verify the story independently. Jake opens his laptop and begins compiling a master dossier. He's done this before, years ago, when he still believed journalism could change things. The muscle memory returns. Organize the information hierarchically. Lead with the most compelling evidence. Provide verification paths. Anticipate counter-arguments. He writes an executive summary that lays out the story in stark terms. 2 alien civilizations attempting a rescue operation, the US military planning to intercept and weaponize it, 78 years of cover-ups finally exposed. The work takes hours. They cross-reference dates, verify technical specifications against publicly available astronomical data, build a chain of evidence that's airtight. By the time dawn breaks outside the motel window, they have a package that could bring down administrations and rewrite human history. Cassandra burns the final copy and holds it up to the light, checking for errors. "I still have contacts," she says. "People who got blacklisted like me. Independent journalists who don't answer to corporate editors. There's a network, whistleblower sites, international media, documentary filmmakers who specialize in this stuff. We flood the zone, release it everywhere simultaneously so they can't suppress it." Jake feels something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, and it takes him a moment to recognize it as hope. Not the cynical performance he's been faking for years, but genuine belief that this might actually work. They have the evidence. They have the distribution network. The truth, once released, becomes unstoppable. "We do this and there's no going back," he says. "They'll come after us with everything, not just surveillance and intimidation. Actual consequences." Cassandra meets his eyes, and there's steel in her gaze. "I've been preparing for this for 15 years. I've lost my career, my reputation, any chance at a normal life. What else can they take?" Jake thinks of his destroyed trailer, his comfortable life of selling fantasies, the years he wasted choosing safety over substance. "Nothing," he says. "They've already taken everything that mattered. This is all that's left." They begin reaching out to contacts, encrypted emails sent through multiple proxies, messages posted to secure forums, packages prepared for overnight delivery to journalists in 3 countries. The evidence spreads like spores, impossible to contain once released. Cassandra works through her network with the efficiency of someone executing a plan she's rehearsed 1,000 times. Jake watches the confirmations roll in. Acknowledgements from journalists, documentarians, academic researchers who specialize in government transparency. The story is too big to ignore, the evidence too solid to dismiss as conspiracy theory. Within hours, it will be everywhere, forcing the public and the international community to confront what's about to happen above the New Mexico desert. That's when Cassandra's screen displays a new alert, and the hope dies in Jake's chest. The telemetry data updates in real time, pulling fresh information from whatever source is still feeding the server farm. 2 trajectories appear on the orbital mechanics visualization, converging with mathematical certainty. 3i Atlas and Nibiru are approaching their rendezvous point, the moment when the rescue vessel will finally retrieve the generation ship after 78 years of separation. A timer appears at the bottom of the display, counting down in hours, minutes, and seconds. Cassandra clicks on it, and a detailed schedule unfolds. The convergence point is directly above New Mexico, visible from the ground if you know where to look. The military has chosen the timing deliberately. Remote location, controlled airspace, maximum operational security, 72 hours, 3 days until the 2 vessels meet and the rescue operation completes, and buried in the schedule files. Jake finds the execution timeline for beam disruption protocol. The orbital platforms will fire their electromagnetic pulse exactly 6 hours before convergence, severing the gravitational tether and stranding Nibiru within capture range. The military isn't waiting for orders. The operation is already in motion, countdown initiated, assets positioned. Even if the evidence goes public, even if journalists start asking questions, even if international pressure mounts, the timeline is too compressed. By the time the world realizes what's happening, it will already be over. Jake stares at the countdown clock, watching the seconds tick away. 72 hours to prevent the deaths of 2 civilizations. 72 hours to stop a military operation backed by classified budgets and decades of institutional momentum. 72 hours armed with nothing but leaked data and the desperate hope that truth matters. "It's not enough," he says quietly. "Going public isn't enough. The timeline is too tight. By the time the story gains traction, they'll have already executed the operation." Cassandra doesn't argue. She's staring at the same countdown, doing the same math, reaching the same conclusion. The evidence they've compiled is devastating, but evidence takes time to propagate, time to verify, time to force institutional response, and time is the one resource they don't have. Then we need a different plan, she says. We need to do more than expose them. We need to actually stop them. Jake's mind races through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. Sabotage the orbital platforms, impossible without access and expertise. Alert the aliens, no way to communicate. Go public and hope for immediate government intervention. Too slow. Every option runs into the same wall. They're two people with stolen data, facing an operation that's already in motion. But somewhere in the back of his mind, the journalist instincts that drove him before cynicism took over start connecting patterns. The colonel's dying confession, the server farm left accessible, the classified data practically handed to them. This isn't accident. This is someone on the inside trying to stop the operation, someone who knew they couldn't do it alone and left breadcrumbs for people desperate enough to follow. There's a window, Jake says slowly, the idea forming even as he speaks. Between when we go public and when they execute, if we release the evidence and simultaneously create enough chaos, protests, media attention, congressional inquiries, we might force them to delay. Buy enough time for diplomacy, for international pressure, for someone with actual power to intervene. Cassandra nods, already seeing where he's going. We need maximum impact, maximum speed, and maximum noise. Not a controlled leak to journalists, a data dump, everything, everywhere, all at once. They look at each other, and Jake sees his own desperate determination reflected in her eyes. This is a Hail Mary play, a gamble with odds that would make any rational person walk away. But rationality is a luxury for people who aren't watching a countdown clock tick toward catastrophe. We have 72 hours, Cassandra says, turning back to her keyboard. Let's make them count. The motel room becomes a war room. Coffee cups multiply on every surface. Sleep becomes a luxury neither can afford. Outside, the surveillance continues. Unmarked cars, listening devices, the constant pressure of being watched. But inside, Jake and Cassandra work with the focused intensity of people who found something worth risking everything for. The countdown continues. 71 hours, 70 hours, 69. Every second brings the rescue operation closer to its completion and closer to the moment when humanity proves itself capable of turning a miracle into an atrocity. The first phone call comes at 6 in the morning, shattering the fragile hope they'd built during the night. Cassandra's burner phone buzzes, and Jake watches her face drain of color as she listens to whoever's on the other end. She doesn't speak, just nods once, twice, then ends the call with a hand that started to shake. Marcus Delgado, she says quietly. The investigative journalist with ProPublica. He was served with a national security subpoena 20 minutes ago. Federal agents are at his office right now, confiscating his computers and files. He's been ordered not to publish anything related to classified aerospace programs under penalty of espionage charges. Jake feels something cold settle in his stomach. Marcus was their strongest contact, a Pulitzer finalist with a reputation for taking on powerful institutions and winning. If they got to him this fast, with this kind of legal machinery, then the Special Access Program is already in motion, already executing a systematic shutdown of every avenue they've opened. The second call comes 15 minutes later, then a third, then a fourth. Each one brings worse news. The whistleblower platform that promised to host the data dump, their servers were seized in a coordinated raid across 3 countries, justified by vague terrorism prevention statutes. The academic researcher who agreed to verify the astronomical data, his university received a letter from the Department of Defense threatening the termination of all federal research grants unless he ceases involvement. The documentary filmmaker, her production company, was audited by the IRS. Her personal bank accounts flagged for suspicious activity. One by one, the contacts fall silent, intimidated, threatened, or simply too afraid to continue. Jake watches Cassandra work through her entire network, burning through burner phones, trying to salvage something from the collapse. But every conversation ends the same way. Apologies, fear, the sound of people choosing self-preservation over truth. By noon, they're alone. Every journalist, every platform, every potential outlet has been neutralized with surgical precision. The Special Access Program isn't just covering up the operation. They're demonstrating their reach, showing Jake and Cassandra exactly how powerless they are. This is institutional machinery operating at full capacity, crushing dissent before it can find oxygen. "They knew," Jake says, staring at the wall of the motel room where they've pinned printouts of their evidence. "They knew exactly who we'd reach out to. They were tracking every contact, every communication. We didn't have a chance." Cassandra slumps in her chair, exhaustion and defeat written in every line of her body. 15 years, she whispers. "I spent 15 years building that network, cultivating sources, establishing trust, creating redundancies, and they dismantled it in less than 12 hours. The media blackout is total. Jake searches news sites, social media, conspiracy forums. Nothing. No leaks, no whispers, no indication that the story is gaining any traction. The information they risked everything to expose is being suffocated before it can breathe. Even the conspiracy theorists, usually eager to amplify anything involving UFOs and government cover-ups, are silent. Either they're being suppressed too, or the disinformation campaign is already underway, poisoning the well with deliberate false leads that will discredit the real story. Jake's phone buzzes with an incoming notification, and his heart stops when he reads it. An email from the New Mexico Business Licensing Bureau, formal and bureaucratic and devastating. His tour business license has been revoked, effective immediately, for fraudulent misrepresentation and violation of consumer protection statutes. The letter cites complaints filed by tourists claiming he made false promises about alien sightings, referenced fabricated evidence, and engaged in deceptive marketing practices. The complaints are dated yesterday, all of them. A coordinated assault designed to look legitimate while destroying the last remnant of his old life. He shows the email to Cassandra, whose face hardens with recognition. She pulls up her own messages, and there it is. A notice from her landlord terminating her lease immediately due to multiple code violations presenting imminent safety hazards. The violations are listed in precise detail. Faulty wiring, structural concerns, fire code infractions, all identified during an emergency inspection conducted this morning by county inspectors who've never shown interest in the building before. "They're not just shutting down our sources," Cassandra says, her voice hollow. "They're erasing our lives, making it impossible for us to exist anywhere, do anything. This is punishment. This is what happens to people who see too much." Jake's bank account is frozen an hour later. The notification arrives via email, clinical and impersonal. Suspicious activity detected, account locked pending investigation by federal authorities, expected resolution time 6 to 8 weeks. He has $300 in cash and a credit card that will probably be cancelled by morning. Cassandra checks her accounts and finds the same thing. Frozen, flagged, inaccessible. They pack in silence, moving with the grim efficiency of people who've already lost. Laptop, hard drives, the physical evidence they've kept as backup. Clothes stuffed into duffel bags. The research materials from Cassandra's apartment walls rolled up and secured with rubber bands because even now, Even after everything, she can't abandon 15 years of work. The motel in the desert is a long, low structure that looks like it was built in the 70s and hasn't been updated since. Cinder block construction, faded paint, a neon vacancy sign that flickers with dying determination. They pay cash for a week using false names, and the clerk doesn't even look up from his phone. This is the kind of place people come to disappear, and the staff has learned not to ask questions. Room 12 smells like cigarettes and industrial cleaner, with furniture that's been beaten into submission by decades of transient occupancy. Jake sets up their workspace on a wobbly table while Cassandra sweeps the room for listening devices, a paranoid precaution that feels entirely reasonable given the past 24 hours. They find nothing, but the absence of surveillance feels like a trap. Why wouldn't they be watching? Because they don't need to watch us, Cassandra says when Jake voices the thought. We're contained, neutralized. We can't publish, can't reach anyone who matters, can't operate in the legitimate world. We're ghosts now. The only question is whether we accept it or keep fighting. Jake looks at the countdown timer on his laptop screen. 48 hours until the rendezvous. 48 hours to save 2 civilizations with no resources, no allies, no avenue of escape. The smart play is to run. Get out of New Mexico. Find somewhere to lay low until the operation completes and the heat dies down. Accept that they tried and failed and hope the Special Access Program considers them sufficiently broken to leave alone. But Jake thinks about the visualization of Three-Eye Atlas pulling Nibiru home after 78 years. He thinks about the survivors of the Roswell crash, or their children, or their grandchildren, waiting in the dark of the outer solar system for a rescue that's finally arriving. And he thinks about his 7 years selling comfortable lies, choosing safety over truth, until it cost him everything worth having. We keep fighting, he says, even if it's futile, even if we lose. We owe them that much. Cassandra nods. And for the first time since the systematic shutdown began, Jake sees something other than despair in her eyes. Determination. The same stubborn refusal to quit that kept her researching for 15 years while the world called her crazy. I have one more contact, she says quietly. Someone I've been saving for exactly this scenario. A staffer on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Not a journalist, not an activist, someone with actual institutional power and the clearance to access classified programs. If we can get the evidence to him, he can force an oversight hearing, demand accountability. Jake wants to believe her, but the pattern is too clear. Every contact has been compromised, every avenue blocked. What if he's already been gotten to? What if they're monitoring him too? Then we lose nothing we haven't already lost, Cassandra says. But if there's even a chance he can force congressional intervention, delay the operation long enough for diplomacy. She doesn't finish the sentence, but she doesn't need to. It's a desperate gamble, and they both know it, but desperation is all they have left. The meeting is set for midnight in a parking garage downtown, the kind of location that feels like it was designed specifically for clandestine exchanges. Jake drives them in, checking the mirrors obsessively for tails, while Cassandra clutches the encrypted drives like they're sacred relics. The garage is mostly empty at this hour. Just scattered vehicles belonging to people working late shifts or too drunk to drive home. They park on the 3rd level as instructed and wait. The contact specified midnight exactly, no early arrivals, and Jake spends the intervening minutes watching the entrance and exit ramps, cataloguing every vehicle that passes, building a mental map of potential escape routes. At 11:58, a silver sedan pulls into the space opposite theirs. A man in his 40s emerges, wearing a suit that's rumpled from a long day and carrying the exhausted expression of someone who works too many hours for too little appreciation. He looks around the garage with obvious nervousness, then approaches their van with his hands visible. Cassandra rolls down her window. David. You shouldn't have called me, the man says, but he doesn't leave. Do you have any idea how much scrutiny Intelligence Committee staffers are under right now? They're looking for leaks everywhere. If I'm caught... This is bigger than leaks, Jake says, leaning across so David can see him. This is an illegal military operation targeting a peaceful first contact scenario. We have evidence of war crimes in progress, and we're running out of time to stop them. David's expression shifts from nervous to intrigued. Show me. Cassandra hands over the encrypted drives and a USB with the decryption key. Everything's documented. Classified telemetry data showing the rescue operation, Pentagon memos outlining the interception plan, historical analysis connecting it back to Roswell. You get this to the Oversight Committee, force a classified hearing, and maybe we buy enough time for someone to shut this down. David pockets the drives and Jake feels a moment of hope. Fragile, tentative, but real. This could work. Congressional oversight, even in a classified setting, could force delays, demand justifications, create enough friction to derail the operation's timeline. I'll do what I can, David says, but you need to disappear. If they know you contacted me... He doesn't finish the sentence. The tactical flashlights hit them from 4 directions simultaneously, turning the garage into a harsh landscape of white glare and black shadows. Jake throws up his hands to shield his eyes, but he can barely see anything beyond the blinding light. Federal agents, exit the vehicle with your hands visible. Cassandra reaches for the door handle, and Jake hears her sharp intake of breath. Fear or resignation, he can't tell which. The doors are yanked open from outside, hands grabbing them, pulling them from the van with professional efficiency. Jake hits the concrete hard, his arms wrenched behind his back, the cold bite of zip ties cutting into his wrists. He turns his head and sees Cassandra pinned to the ground 10 feet away, 3 figures in black tactical gear securing her with mechanical precision. David is being escorted away, the encrypted drives already confiscated, and Jake sees the truth in the man's apologetic expression. Compromised. Either a plant from the beginning or intercepted and flipped. It doesn't matter which, the result is the same. The bathroom window. The thought cuts through Jake's panic like a knife. He's parked the van deliberately, driver's side toward the stairwell, passenger side toward the exterior wall. When they pulled him out, they dragged him left, away from the building's edge. The bathroom window in their motel faces the rear of the property, small but accessible. Jake stops resisting. He goes limp, forcing them to carry his weight, and in the moment when they shift their grip to compensate, he kicks backward with everything he has. His heel connects with someone's knee, and he hears a grunt of pain. The hands loosen for just a second, long enough. He rolls, scrambles to his feet despite the zip ties, and runs for the stairwell. Shouts behind him, boots pounding on concrete. But Jake has desperation and the advantage of knowing this garage's layout from his obsessive scouting. He hits the stairs at full speed, taking them 3 at a time, bursting through the ground floor exit into the street. The motel is 3 blocks away. Jake runs like he's never run before, his bound hands throwing off his balance, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, he hears vehicles starting, the coordinated movement of a tactical response, but he's already diving into an alley, cutting through a parking lot, taking a route designed for fleeing rather than efficiency. He reaches the motel, crashes through the bathroom window, thank God they left it unlocked, and lands in the shower with the impact that drives the air from his lungs. His laptop is still on the table, the countdown timer glowing in the darkness. 24 hours until rendezvous. Jake uses a shard of broken glass from the window to saw through the zip ties, his hands shaking so badly he cuts himself twice before getting free. He grabs the laptop, the backup drives, everything critical, and leaves through the front door. The van is compromised, his identification is burned, his last ally is captured. He's alone in the desert night with less than a day to prevent an atrocity and absolutely no idea how to do it. The fear is a living thing now. clawing at his chest, demanding he run and keep running until New Mexico is a memory. But Jake thinks of Cassandra, zip-tied and captured, because she believed truth mattered more than safety. He thinks of the Colonel's dying confession, the burden of conscience finally spoken. He thinks of two civilizations reaching for each other across the void, 78 years of separation finally ending. And he thinks that maybe, for the first time in his cynical, comfortable life, he's found something worth the cost. Jake disappears into the desert darkness, the countdown ticking in his mind like a bomb. The abandoned gas station squats at the edge of nowhere, its windows long since shattered by vandals or weather, its pumps rusted monuments to a time when this stretch of highway still mattered. Jake huddles in what used to be the office, surrounded by debris and ancient yellowed receipts, his laptop balanced on a tilted desk that probably hasn't supported weight in 20 years. The police scanner he salvaged from a pawn shop crackles with static beside him, cycling through frequencies with methodical persistence. He's been listening for 3 hours, filtering through civilian chatter and dispatch calls, searching for the encrypted military frequencies he knows are out there. The scanner is old enough that its firmware predates modern security protocols, a relic from an era when secrecy meant physical distance rather than digital encryption. If he can find the right frequency, if the military is using legacy backup systems, he might catch fragments of operational communications. The breakthrough comes at 2:17 a.m. A burst of static resolves into clipped voices, military precision filtered through compression artifacts. Beam disruption protocol authorized for 0600 hours. Roswell AFB Coordination Center has primary control, orbital platforms responding nominal. Final countdown sequence initiates at T-6 hours. Jake's hand shoots out to increase the volume, but the transmission cuts off, replaced by the hiss of empty air. He waits, breath held, and catches another fragment 10 minutes later. Contingency. If the rescue vessel attempts evasive maneuvers. Intelligence projects collision debris field extending across 3 AU. Acceptable losses given asset acquisition priority. Acceptable losses. The phrase hits Jake like a physical blow. They're not just planning to disrupt the rescue, they're anticipating catastrophic failure. The tractor beam holding 3i Atlas and Nibiru in their delicate gravitational dance will be severed by electromagnetic pulse, and the two vessels will either collide with each other or scatter debris across millions of miles of space. Two civilizations, one traveling for 78 years to save the other, reduced to expanding clouds of wreckage. And the military calls it acceptable because they'll still get their prize, fragments of alien technology. Maybe bodies to study, intelligence assets extracted from the ruins of a rescue operation that should have been humanity's first genuine contact with otherworldly life. Jake feels his stomach turn. He stumbles outside, breathing the cold desert air, trying to process the magnitude of what he's hearing. Cassandra was right about everything. The evidence they compiled, the analysis they conducted, it was all accurate. But accuracy doesn't matter when institutional power decides truth is inconvenient. He sits in the dirt behind the gas station, his back against sun-warmed cinder block that's already starting to cool in the night air, and stares up at the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his vision, 3i Atlas is executing the final phase of its rescue operation. Somewhere in the outer darkness, Nibiru waits for deliverance. And here on Earth, Jake Mercer, failed journalist, cynical tour guide, reluctant truth-seeker, holds knowledge that weighs like lead in his chest. He pulls the Colonel's business card from his pocket, the edges soft from handling. The handwritten coordinates smudged but still legible. Colonel Richard Voss spent his final hours confessing his sins to a stranger in a parking lot, choosing conscience over comfortable silence. The old man carried this burden for decades, complicit in the cover-up, and in the end, he couldn't die without trying to make it right. Jake understands now what that choice cost. The comfortable lie is so much easier. The safe path, the one that doesn't lead to destroyed trailers and frozen bank accounts and friends captured in parking garages, is right there. Jake could walk away from this, disappear into another state, another life, let the operation proceed and tell himself he tried his best. Go back to selling fantasies, or find some new way to avoid caring about things that matter. The thought is seductive, tempting in its simplicity, and it fills him with self-loathing so profound he can taste it. Because Jake has spent 7 years choosing comfort over truth, and it turned him into exactly the kind of person he used to despise. The journalist he was before cynicism took hold would have burned every bridge, risked everything, sacrificed anything to expose a story this big. But somewhere along the way, Jake learned that consequences hurt, that standing for principles gets you fired and blacklisted and alone. He learned to prefer the numb safety of not caring. And now 2 civilizations will die because people like him, people who know better but choose comfort anyway, outnumber the people like Cassandra and the Colonel, who refuse to accept convenient lies. Jake sits in the darkness, wrestling with the question that's haunted him since the moment the Colonel pressed that business card into his palm. Is knowing the truth worth the cost if you can't change the outcome? Is fighting futile battles preferable to accepting comfortable ignorance? The desert offers no answers, just silence and stars and the weight of choices that can't be unmade. The map is what saves him from despair. Jake finds it crumpled in his laptop bag, a tourist map of Roswell area facilities from his old tour business, covered with his own handwritten annotations, accumulated over years of research. Security checkpoints at the Walker AFB Historic Site, guard rotation schedules at the International UFO Museum, access routes to the supposedly decommissioned listening posts, operational details he collected because knowing the real story made the performance more convincing. He spreads the map on the gas station floor, smoothing the creases, and begins cross-referencing it with the coordinates from the Colonel's card and the fragments he's intercepted on the scanner. Roswell AFB Coordination Center. The phrase echoes in his mind, and he starts marking locations on the map with a pen, triangulating possibilities. The epiphany comes slowly, like dawn breaking over the desert. The military's operation requires precise timing. The electromagnetic pulse must hit the tractor beam at exactly the right moment, when the 2 vessels are close enough that disruption guarantees either collision or capture. That precision requires coordination from a central facility, probably somewhere with direct communication to the orbital platforms and the historical significance to house the program's senior personnel. Narrative symmetry. Where it began in 1947 is where they'll try to end it. Jake's pen hovers over a location on the map, and suddenly all the pieces align. The old Roswell Army Airfield Coordination Bunker, supposedly decommissioned after the Cold War, but never actually demolished. Deep enough to shield against electromagnetic interference, old enough to predate modern oversight, isolated enough to operate without civilian detection. The same facility where they would have brought the Roswell crash debris in 1947. He doesn't need to convince the world. Cassandra was right about exposure, but the timeline killed that strategy. Even if he could get the evidence to every journalist on Earth, even if they all believed him and published simultaneously, the operation would complete before the public pressure could build to effective levels. But if he can disrupt the coordination center, even for a few minutes, even just long enough to delay the electromagnetic pulse beyond the optimal timing window, then maybe 3I Atlas completes the rescue before the military can recover. The vessels reunite, accelerate beyond Earth's reach, and humanity loses its chance to turn a miracle into an atrocity. It's not about stopping them permanently. It's about buying time measured in minutes. Jake's hands are shaking as he starts planning. His encyclopedic knowledge of Roswell area facilities, accumulated through years of harmless tour guiding, suddenly becomes a weapon. He knows the security patterns, the blind spots in camera coverage, the shift changes when enforcement is weakest. He knows which perimeter fences are monitored and which are maintained through inertia rather than necessity. He knows the difference between facilities that look secure and facilities that are secure. And he knows that nobody expects a threat from a disgraced tour guide with nothing to lose. The supplies come from abandoned buildings along the highway, places where civilization retreated and left its tools behind. Wire cutters from a foreclosed ranch property, a mechanic's coveralls from an auto shop that closed when the highway was rerouted. He even finds a contractor badge in the wreckage of his trailer when he returns under cover of darkness. One of the props he used to embellish tour stories, now potentially useful for real infiltration. Jake works through the remaining hours of darkness, preparing with the methodical focus of someone who's accepted that tomorrow might be his last day of freedom, or his last day, period. The military will have protocols for dealing with intruders at a classified facility, and those protocols won't include gentle questioning and due process. But the alternative is watching the countdown expire while he hides in the desert, safe and useless and complicit through inaction. As the first grey light of dawn touches the horizon, Jake drives toward Roswell. The city materializes out of the emptiness like a cluster of artificial stars, streetlights and neon signs advertising alien-themed attractions that trivialize the very real contact about to occur overhead. He passes the International UFO Museum, where he used to end his tours with theatrical flourishes about government conspiracies. He passes the souvenir shops selling little green alien dolls and tinfoil hats. He passes the tourist trap he helped build through 7 years of selling comfortable fantasies. And he drives beyond them, toward the industrial edge of town, where the real secrets live. The coordination bunker is exactly where his research predicted. A reinforced concrete structure disguised as a water treatment facility, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras that look functional but outdated. Jake parks 3 blocks away and approaches on foot, keeping to the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs with a rhythm that feels like countdown itself. He's chosen meaning over comfort, truth over safety, the certainty of consequence over the illusion of security. This is the person he was supposed to be before fear taught him to compromise. The journalist who believed that some stories are worth any cost, that bearing witness matters even when it can't change the outcome. But Jake isn't just bearing witness anymore. He's acting. And the distinction feels like the difference between the person he was and the person he's finally becoming. The wire cutters bite through the fence with a sound like small bones breaking. Jake slips through the gap, his mechanic's coveralls blending with the pre-dawn gloom, the forged contractor badge clipped to his chest like armor made of laminated paper and desperate hope. 22 hours until rendezvous. 22 hours to become someone who chose truth when comfort was still an option. 22 hours to prove that cynicism isn't the only rational response to a world that punishes conscience. Jake moves toward the bunker entrance, every step a choice, every breath a commitment. Behind him the stars are fading as dawn approaches. Above him, invisible to human eyes, 2 civilizations reach for each other across the void. And ahead of him, locked inside reinforced concrete and institutional certainty, waits the machinery designed to turn reunion into catastrophe. Jake has spent 7 years running from consequence. Tonight, he runs toward it. The door to the coordination bunker is steel and certainty, and Jake has no idea how he'll get through it. But he's done running, done choosing safety, done accepting that comfortable lies are preferable to dangerous truths. Whatever happens next, at least it will be real.